started.
And find your way back to the tables when you can. So I wanted to do a quick introduction. You have all their bio and info on some sheets out there, but again, we have Spekman from MassChallenge, Malia Lazu from Epicenter Community, Kara Miller, Executive or Program Manager at WeBoss, Women Entrepreneurs Boston, and Nancy Batista-Caswell, who is a successful women entrepreneur with her own group of restaurants. So I just wanted to welcome them, ask them to share their experiences, and I have some questions to sort of lead us off. Kara, I'm going to start with you and ask you to sort of describe to us how WeBoss came to be and what you are doing as WeBoss right now.
Sure, absolutely. Do you want to mic me or should I just yell? I can do either. I'm used to doing both. So we actually launched our Women Entrepreneurship Program back in 2014 when we decided to create our Women on Main program in partnership with the Main Street districts. And we really began that because we had some research findings that from census data that year that showed that only about 30+% of our women-owned businesses, were women-owned. We also were getting reports that women were having difficulty making the connections they needed to launch and grow their businesses, and we got the numbers that women were not scaling. So we said, let's launch this program in our Main Street districts and our neighborhoods to really bring together our women entrepreneurs and help support them. And what we found was that from the day we launched, all I had to do was put this Women on Main logo on something and 100 women were storming down the door. And we were kicking people out at 10 o'clock at night saying, okay, flicking the lights, go home. And it was just, I was getting calls every day. I'm a woman-owned business that works from home. I have no network. I have no resources. Can I come to your events? Hey, I'm actually a startup, but I'm actually having trouble identifying a network and I'm looking to connect with other women. Can I join your events? And we were lucky enough that in that first year, 700 women, I did of course open the doors, and 700 women came to our events. And within that year, Mayor Walsh was elected and created the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement, and he is incredibly dedicated to the issue of equity for women. Our city is 52% women. Women are the primary earners in 54% of our households. So equity for women is not just good for women, it's good for our economy, and it's good, for the vitality of our city as a whole. So I went to Megan and I said, we are finding that these the Diana Project came out that year saying 3% of venture capital dollars were going to women, and I said, we have this huge, enormous gap in the women's entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I really think we need to address this in a much bigger, broader way than our Women on Main program, which has gotten such success. And we decided to launch Women Entrepreneurs Boston to really encompass that entire ecosystem of women and support all our women entrepreneurs to scale and grow. And when we created the program last October, so this is our 1-year anniversary week, we realized we didn't necessarily need to be the programmer because in that time, so many support organizations had been created. There was now She Starts and the Babs and Win Lab, and all these programs were now available where we said, what if we got all the groups together and under this WeBoss umbrella had a great week where we showcased all these opportunities. And as our study found, women do tend to be disconnected from those resources and opportunities available. So we did just that. We launched our first WeBoss Week with 13 event partners. We had 1,000 women in attendance. And our program has continued to grow, and really with the primary goal of being that convener and connector and helping women access these different resources that are available out in the ecosystem.
Thank you. So I want to move on to Nancy and talk about her experiences. So thank you. So thank you, Kara. I wanted to move on to Nancy and to ask you, as an entrepreneur, how did you build and grow your business, and what challenges did you face?
So I actually started my first restaurant at the age of 28, and I am a privately owned company now, with opening my third restaurant here in Boston, Fort Point, actually a block away from GE within the next 10 days. So yeah, it's a little hairy out here today. But anyway, one of the things that I felt just hearing today was very much about financial investments and such, because as a woman, especially pertaining to restaurant or hospitality industry, it is very challenging because people look at it like a risky business, and so you have to, basically network and get into the right social circles. While people, eating is our country's favorite hobby, it is challenging because people have a connection to restaurants and in my industry because they do eat out and they have expectations. So finding investors in a restaurant can be challenging because there are no assets to attach other than a dream that you may have and a brand that you may have created. So through the years, just consciously being careful towards, investment or shall I say, expense management, and trying to drop the most amount of money I could to the bottom line with the idea that I wanted to grow into Boston proper. Having 2 restaurants in the suburbs allowed me to have a little less rent and able to work towards real estate investment and having some opportunity for assets like real estate. But hearing today, about how challenging it is to really kind of sit across the table from, let's just say, a group of gentlemen and ask for dollars for a dream that you may have, it's really important that when you come to the table, you're really present and you can address with confidence what you're looking to do and achieve and really connect with them, because I think as women, we tend to really connect in an emotional, instinct way, and sometimes we can lack confidence around the table when we're asking for things that we need. And then I think the other thing that touched home today, just listening, is really the grassroots approach of our city and what we need to do. I spoke last year at the WeBoss event in Fort Point and instantly made connections with women who were in the room and followed up with email and really networked. And that was really important because you start to see each other in a different way, challenges we're all experiencing. But I'm not a contractor, and in my particular case, a good instance of showing, the city's challenges is, going into 1010 Mass Ave and trying to pull permits and trying to work aggressively to open in time and really trying to make connections there. And there is a gender gap there at times, and you're not a male contractor with a hammer. Do I look as confident and can I answer the questions of construction and timelines to get things done in the right way? And so the grassroots approach and just the ability to network is so huge as an entrepreneur trying to grow and establish your dreams and an effective company and certainly rise to the occasion to be the best that you can within your industry. And then of course, foster the environment for young women in your organization to feel like they can do the same and achieve their goals in their way, which is mentorship, again, a huge part of our organization. So, but in the past year, I've seen just such amazing growth and having the ability to connect with WeBoss and ask questions when you need them and connect with people or women, that could help you and your organization is just a really great opportunity and a good networking solution that in the previous years when I opened my first at the age of 28 really wasn't necessarily as existent as it is today.
So thank you so much, Nancy. And I also want to point out we were going to have Diana Verdes here to join us as a very successful woman entrepreneur, but she's not available.
Successfully working.
Successfully working, because that's what we do. But just to recognize her as well. I wanted to move on to you, Rachel. So you represent broadly an entrepreneur support organization, MassChallenge. Why is diversity and inclusion important at your organization?
Thank you so much for having me, first of all, and it's great to see everybody here. So why is diversity important? It's important for so many reasons, and I think particularly at MassChallenge, where we really have reached a point where we are with a critical mass in terms of a large audience and a large reach. It's thinking about how can we broaden the opportunities and really engage the next class of entrepreneurs to think more broadly. So as I've kind of been hearing everyone speak, I've been thinking a lot about some of the things that we've done this summer. So for example, we've had Girls Tech Week happen at MassChallenge, and we're actually we had a Bring Your Kids to MassChallenge Day for the first time this year. So we're really trying to shepherd the future opportunities for the next class of entrepreneurs and of course for the current class. And so I think why it's so important, particularly at MassChallenge, is as we grow here in Boston and as we think about global growth, we're in 5 cities now, a lot of people are looking to Boston and to MassChallenge as what does diversity look like? What are the key initiatives? What are the key priorities? So for us, it's really been around gender equity, racial equity, age, really, of course, diverse industries represented at MassChallenge. So thinking about diversity as a priority across a multitude of spectrums. And I think something like We Boss, yesterday we had our big event at MassChallenge. It was a female founder success panel. And I think that actually really crystallized a lot of kind of the work that's happening here in Boston that you alluded to in the study, which was we had women who were coming to our event, had never heard of MassChallenge, or never been to MassChallenge, and then they were rushing off to the She Starts networking event. And all of a sudden there was just this plethora of opportunities to really network and not feel so isolated or alone, and know that there's really a full community to support them. So I think those are some of the initiatives that we're working on, and really some of the reasons that diversity is so important across MassChallenge.
Thank you to Rachel. I'm Malia. I'm going to ask you the same question, but I'm also going to ask you to speak a little bit about your background, because you're sort of very passionate and worker in this space for much longer than you've been at Epicenter. So, definitely want to hear your history and your passion, but also to speak about why it's so important for you as well.
Definitely. So hi everybody, and this is awesome. I'm so glad we're able to talk about this. I hope people are tweeting so we can continue the conversation at Epicenter if you want to talk with me any further. But so yes, first I got started in thinking about economic development by working with gangs and helping gangs think through how to start legitimate businesses. If you look at a gang as a necessary entity, then, and which it is in a lot of projects, and if you want I can take you to some so you can see why people need family and support, what you see is that they're actually a very important thing in impoverished neighborhoods. The problem is that the economies they're given lend themselves towards violence. The economies they're given are drugs, right, are people, are black market things. But if you can actually take that infrastructure, which is an entrepreneurial infrastructure, and if you can give them a legitimate business, they will actually become a legitimate business. I mean, if you want to see the most successful example of that, look up Homeboy Industries with Father Greg Boyle in LA, who was able to, I think he was in the Wall Street Journal. They had like netted a few millions, enough to be cared about in the Wall Street Journal. They jumped over to the real capitalist side there. And so that was work I was doing with Harry Belafonte, and it became really evident to me how much we're missing the boat in really thinking about how do we include diversity in entrepreneurship. And one of the main things that I want to point out, Banu, that you were talking about is you cannot talk about integration without actually reflecting on your own bias. And that's something that we have yet to see in, whether it's in accelerated programs, efforts. We actually don't put out report cards or anything that self-reflects on where does our unconscious gender bias as an organization, as a person, right? As a woman of color, I'm an American, which means I am racist and sexist. I went to American public school. I couldn't help but become that. And so it's important that we actually take the time, rather than just paying lip service to it, but that we actually look at how do we change who we are. Anyone who's heard me speak before knows the story of the giraffe and the elephant. And this is, the giraffe was friends with elephant. He wanted the elephant to come and hang out with him. He invited him over to the house, but the elephant couldn't fit in the giraffe's house because the house was built for a giraffe. Boston's entrepreneur scene is built for giraffes. And so it doesn't matter how much we want elephants to come. If we're not going to change the way we build the house, then nothing but giraffes are going to be able to get in. And that's really what we're seeing. So I think it's great to talk about efforts and but we have to talk about systemic and institutional sexism and racism if we want to actually get to integration. We can't do it any other way. So why is that important to me? I'm an organizer, as you heard. I was, working in 26 states, working with gangs all throughout the country. And when I came back to Boston, I hid out at MIT for a couple of years and really tried to figure out, what does organizing for the 21st century look like? because it can't look like organizing for the 20th century, right? We're different people, we communicate differently, we have more opportunity, and yes, we've actually progressed, right? I mean, millennials don't hold half of the stuff we hold. I'm so thankful for them, these millennials. They're getting me to wear my natural hair. I mean, like, it's really awesome. They're, you know, we are moving forward. So how do we embrace that, become maybe a little less victim story dependent in our nonprofit work and in our charity work? And that's what really led me to creating an accelerator program throughout our own program. So we don't only do an accelerator, we're a cultural program. We bring together 50,000 people a year, depending on the year, but to come together in social ways. We throw Juneteenth at the Museum of Fine Arts, taking the blackest holiday, putting it at the whitest institution. Guess what you get? A mixed room. It's incredible. White people feel comfortable. They're like, it's the MFA, because you know a lot of white folks don't know we celebrate Juneteenth. You can come up to the barbecues in Franklin Park June 19th. But also the black community says, oh my gosh, you know, what do they know about Juneteenth? I'm gonna go, right? So both people are coming in feeling safe. And that's really what our organization is around. We create experiences for authentic diversity. And so the idea of having an economic engine that would allow women, minorities, people to start businesses was very, very important to me in my continual journey to promote social justice. So I'll end by just talking a little bit about Accelerate Boston. There's a great article on Banner Biz that you guys can totally look up, and it shows three of our fabulous, including Diana Vertes, and Rika, who actually made it to the final round. Is she the only person of color in the finals? She's the only person. She told me. No, she's the only person of color in the finals. She graduated from our class 2 years ago. And so it's wonderful to see, you know, our women and other folks. So we're a 6-month program. And what we do that I think makes our accelerator really unique and working in this field is that we take on the trauma. So when we talk about finance, we talk about the trauma of money, because if you're broke and you're gonna go put together a budget of $1 million and your mother didn't have a bank account, you're actually not, and you're gonna leave the accelerator thinking you can't be an entrepreneur. So before we even put a P&L, before we put a budget in front of someone, we circle up and we talk about the trauma of money. And so our accelerator has a very unique intention of addressing the baggage that you take on when you're living in a society that still has a lot of unconscious gender and race bias. So we've had 85 businesses go through our accelerator. 17 have gone to market, you know, they're open, they're hiring people. Several of those are brick and mortar businesses that you can walk into. 77% of our businesses are people of color. 56% of them are women, and 96% of them are under the age of 40. So this next go round, we're looking at, thank you, but that's not diverse. 96% under 40, that's not diverse. So I'm looking for some of my, you know, some of folks my age and above. Let's come and hang out with the young kids. They give us energy. And so, you know, we've literally flipped the model. And not only have we flipped it, but we're one of the few accelerators within the inner city that has actually brought businesses to market. One of our businesses is in Forbes 30 Under 30 this year. And so I do think it's a very unique example. And as we're seeing the cluster in Roxbury with Smarter in the City, with Commonwealth Kitchen, you know, it's important that we look at what are the standards. Because the last thing we need in looking at how do we integrate innovation is continuing to support the bigotry of low expectations.
Thank you so much, Malia, and I think we need these difficult conversations to move us forward. So Kara, I want to circle back to you and to see what are sort of the next steps for WeBoss, and maybe sort of address some of the things that you've heard here today as we are looking forward.
Sure, absolutely. So we have built an incredible ecosystem with WeBoss, and I think growing organically out of our neighborhoods, out of our communities has actually been one of the best things that's happened to our program, because our mailing list, our network, it's from women from every type of business, every type of background, from every corner of the city. And so we've built this great ecosystem, but I think now that we have, and there's so many reasons to have women-only events. Women need to build their network, it's a comfortable space, we can discuss unique challenges we face. However, we need to make sure that though we'll continue to have those events, this year it's all about how do we take this network that we've built and how do we get those women access into the bigger and very strong entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Boston. So it's we are going to be speaking to, continuing to speak with accelerators to say, what are you doing to be intentional about including women? We're going to be talking to VCs. Oh, well, no women are in your pipeline, no women are talking to you. We have women. I have hundreds of them. If you want to go binders? Yeah. We got binders. I can list 20 businesses off the top of my head that could be a fit for any type of funding. So we need to be really making it clear that we have built this network and we want to use it to get access. And I think we need to be holding all these programs really accountable to do. What are you doing and how are you doing it? Because if you're not finding that you're having women apply and you're not reaching out to diverse candidates, how can we come up with you? Like, we want to work with people. This is not to scold people or put them down or say, it's actually to say, hey, let's address that there is a challenge and how do we work together to overcome it? And a perfect example, we partnered with She Starts last year and we did a panel discussion to encourage women to apply to MassChallenge. And it was an opportunity where women could hear from women who were past participants, hear about the experience, hear about the application process, and really be able to ask the questions so that it didn't seem like something that wasn't accessible or available to them. But that's just one of our accelerators. So I think there's a lot more work that can be done. And the city's really standing behind this. WeBoss is now under the Office of Economic Development, and we are a major program player in the city's equity agenda. So equity for women entrepreneurs is something we're really being strategic about, we're thinking about, and we're going to continue to have these conversations throughout the year. So I think that's we have a lot of work, and I think this data, I want to say it's horrifying to me, but also at the same time I'm excited we have it because we all know that the numbers are this bad, and it actually gives us an opportunity to say, hey, it's not just hearsay. Oh, or people will say it's not as bad as people really think it is, and it's like, no, here are the numbers. So thank you to the Kauffman Foundation and UMass for kind of giving us, the numbers we needed to really push this agenda.
Could I just have a solution? One of the things I wanted to throw out, or I wanted to make sure I mentioned here, is that Oakland is actually doing entrepreneurship in a really, really well, really effectively, and while Oakland is being gentrified beautifully, almost as quickly as Boston is, the outcomes that you're seeing are, are minority. They're minority numbers that are really respectable. And there's two things I just want to throw out that they do that for other people to think about. The first is something called Pop-Up Hood, where the city of Oakland and landlords work together to have pop-up spaces, short-term leases with the ability to get long-term leases. I know that we made it to the final round of the Whittier Choice neighborhoods. Hopefully, St. Louis is on that. I'm like, don't be putting out all this good stuff about St. Louis. Like, we need to get this grant. But and hopefully that might be a place where we can experiment. But the most interesting thing to me is right now Oakland's experimenting with capital. And I'm actually, hopefully Boston will be the next city to take this on. And they've created a certificate of deposit that acts as friends and family capital. So one of the biggest problems, as we said, is that women can't get access to capital in the same way. And so this is a CD that allows communities to support. They get a 1.8 return, and those CDs and that capital is able to act more like friends and family capital. And I think as smart as we are with all of our wicked smart colleges, we can figure out how to have capital flow like friends and family capital, knowing that the average wealth in the city of Boston for an African American family is, what was it, $700? Was that the freeze frame report? And then the average wealth for a white family is like $150,000. So when you're dealing with $700 versus $150,000, right? It's some huge gap. I know national it was 11,000, I think. But when you have those kinds of gaps, again, we can have these conversations all we want, but the reality is that we actually have to take on some of the systemic stuff.
Build the house for the giraffe.
And build the house for the elephant.
For the elephant. Change the giraffe.
Right. Change the giraffe.
So thank you again to Kara for pointing out that the city is behind sort of holding accelerators and investors accountable moving forward in terms of their outcomes related to gender and other dimensions of diversity. I think that's really important. And to Malia for sharing sort of those very smart grassroots efforts to change the system. Nancy, I want to circle back to you and say, so what is sort of the next steps for you? What do you see as your challenges that you're facing as you're growing your restaurant business, and what is it that we need to be talking about to make sure that women like you who are growth oriented get what you need.
Well, Danny Myers in New York owns Union Hospitality Group and has been a key leader for our industry. If anybody follows or understands what he's done with hospitality or service included, where gratuities ended in some of his restaurants and service was applied as a service charge to affect chefs in the back of the house and servers in the front to have equal pay opportunities. And within our industry, it's very challenging because, of course, not always do people look at servers and cooks or chefs or prep cooks and such as a profession. They look at it as a stepping stone to their next big move or in between college. And I agree, relative to the millennials, because I think I still fit within one, but we've changed quite a bit. The way we think about our experiences, the way we can communicate, and so, working towards retirement plans, which was something I worked with a financial planner here in Boston, to be able to provide a 401k retirement for women and men in our industry who could be servers and cooks who are trying to pay, make $13, $14 and pay the rent that Boston is now pushing towards is, and getting them to focus on, we have to think about your future and retire. That was a big step for our organization and for me because not many people wanted to approve something like that. And then for me, again, expense management and working towards a privately owned match for these people was, I think, a big stepping stone for us. And moving forward, as we come into Boston, an opportunity to get people to think about this is a profession, that something like Danny Myers in New York City has been able to offer maternal leaves, paternal leaves, and hospitality included services. I was approached by Macmillan, and I thought this was very interesting, about doing a book at my age for what I've done in our industry. And I found it very interesting because many times when I speak about food and worked with several other chef restaurateurs like Barbara Lynch or Jody Adams here in our city, we not always think about being a woman in this industry. We always just think about being the best we can in our own industry. And some of us don't choose to have the gender relative to our title, but in this book they offered me, which I was very excited about, they mentioned the idea of, why isn't this a female written book? And I thought, well, it is by me, but I don't know necessarily whether or not I want it to be so gender specific. And funny enough, when they were showing us the detail of, Kindle downloads and Amazon downloads and all of that, we realized that there were more men buying woman-related books because they wanted to be more in tune with the people that were sitting at their table. And I thought that was really, really interesting to think about, because you get so caught up as a female thinking, I don't want to be just the best female, I want to be the best restaurateur, I want to be the best chef, or I want to be in the Time, article relative to women in the kitchen. And just last week, FabFitFun released 5 boss ladies, fortunately included myself and Barbara in that. But again, you step back and you think, who else could have been present in this if it was male and woman? And so I find it very interesting that men are actually opening up to the idea of downloading and reading these books to try to connect with women. And I think that gives us a good sense of strength and ability and confidence to move forward in the next year to think about, what am I going to do next and how am I going to bring myself to the table? And I find the Women's Conference that Boston hosts to be such a great event as well, where it sells out in like 10 hours of going live, and just really hearing the stories of women and how excited they are to be here in Boston, and all again working collaboratively with Blue Boss. I think that's a really big year ahead of us to just think about what we can do collaboratively in the future. And I think the last thing really is just thinking about each other less as competitors and more as collaborators in the city, I think is a really big deal. I think we look at overly saturated neighborhoods and restaurants and in our industry, professionals that want to get into this industry, and whether or not we have enough chefs and servers to work in the restaurants that are being licensed and built as our neighborhoods grow. And I think it's really important for us to think about each other as collaborators, and how do we grow to be able to offer all the things we want to do and do it correctly and to the expectation of our guests that walk through the door and the people that purchase items from our businesses, versus looking at each other like we both can't do this, so one has to, one has to fail and one has to succeed.
So I'm gonna come back to, so thank you, Nancy, for sort of expressing what are the remaining challenges and what you've done very successfully to change some of those norms in the industry, essentially. Circling back to you, Rachel, as MassChallenge, what did you do differently to sort of make programs or cohorts become more inclusive? What are the specific things you've done at MassChallenge, and then for you, what challenges still remain going forward?
Great. It's a big question. I think kind of outlined it in 3 different ways. I think of kind of where we are and where we're hoping to go. So I think the first is we are all about our startups. So how can we make sure that we are recruiting and letting the best startups out there, men, women, etc., know that MassChallenge exists and is there for them. So for example, whether it's through partnerships like we were talking about earlier with Epicenter, with Win, etc., to say we want the very best startups. And really when I think about the success of the startups this year and the variety of startups, I don't know if you've heard of Work, that's rethinking, W-E-R-K, how women work in the world. Jules, who's rethinking how women and girls interface with technology. So all of these startups that are really the future ideas of everything that we're talking about, how can we make sure that they're part of the larger ecosystem, whether it's MassChallenge or something else? I think, so again, starting with the entrepreneurs, making sure we're partnering with the best people out there or the top organizations to recruit the best entrepreneurs. I think the second is really partnering with VCs, speakers, being really mindful, and I did a lot of curriculum recruitment this year, and I really tried to lead with and working with Bobby, who I saw was here for Innovation Women, that our goal is to have 50-50 gender on every panel that we have, and just being at the forefront of saying that. And we have a long way to go as it relates to gender, as it relates to diverse voices, as it relates to age, race, sexual orientation, etc. So, but I think really being mindful and forthright about that is important. And I think the last piece is the alumni support. And so as our startups continue beyond MassChallenge, there still are these kind of large systemic issues that we're talking about that people face. And so how do we continue to create a dialogue and a conversation where we can say, yep, that's something that we either talk about in Women in MassChallenge, or we want you to come back and speak about what it was like to present. Yesterday we had one of our startups who is now 9 months pregnant talking about what that means to be pitching in front of a group of people. So just those on, as life takes you in different directions. We had another person, Ashley Lucas, who decided to close her business and talking about what it means to close a business. And so just as life continues to move your business forward, how do we continue to have this conversation as you become an alumni? So I think these are some of the key issues that we're working on. And of course, as a staff and as a team, as a global organization, I'm really excited to announce that we just hired a new COO for MassChallenge, a woman, which was awesome. And so we're really, take the credit. No, but I think really trying to be mindful of our diversity internally as well, so that we're leading with that.
Thank you. I actually wanted to open it up to questions the audience might have, comments, suggestions, sharing of what you're doing for inclusion. So I'll open it up and I'll probably come around with the mic to you. Bill.
I don't think I need a mic. Do I need a mic?
No, you're good. You're allowed.
So, Banu, when you were presenting, you talked about challenging the norms, which you're all working at. We're all working to do, but you also mentioned mentoring. So what are the plans collectively to try to improve the network of people that are automatically assigned to growth-oriented businesses that you discover that can help them get over the hump that you talked about earlier?
So to me or to anyone?
I look to you because I know you.
Yeah, right.
To anybody.
So I'll start, but I would love for others. And I think this is the issue of the networking problem, where people tend to immediately go to the network that they have. And I think one of the solutions here in Boston is to be conscious in opening up and sort of reaching out to entrepreneur support organizations that are much more diverse than yours to say, do you have some mentors or alumni who have these set of skills? I think that conversation is just starting to happen in Boston. And there are people moving back and forth between sort of the Roxbury Innovation Center and sort of the hub in the city. That sort of reciprocal exchange between ideas and people is just happening, but I think much more conscious effort on the part of ESOs to reach out to networks that are not just their own, because you don't have a lot of time, I get that, and you're busy, and you have these set people in your networks that have worked well for you, but ultimately we know that there's much more benefits to diversity that you're sort of missing out on, and it leads to, I think, better decision making. So I think intentionally, there's people here that have sort of voiced the fact that they have very diverse networks compared to others, and I think reaching out to them and saying, can we be partners in sharing mentors and growing a base of much more diverse alumni work. But I wanted to open it up to other panelists who might have.
I'll say something briefly. I didn't mention it. But if you've heard me speak before, I do say that this year 43% of the 128 companies had a female on their founding team. And yet our mentor rate for females really is pretty stagnant at like 22-23%. And we've done several different things, and what we're continuing to do, I just emailed Diane Hessen when I saw Brad. I was like, how can we get this out there? So I think part of it's being shameless about like, these are our numbers. Like somebody said earlier, just looking at the raw data and saying, help us get there. We had a campaign that went out to all of our corporate partners, about 100 corporate partners, saying this is our challenge, help us get there. So again, sort of leading the conversation, but still it remains a little bit stagnant. And so how do we kind of broaden our own network, I think is part one for MassChallenge that we're really working on. I think the second part is this year we're actually, as we close out MassChallenge pretty soon, we're working on a pretty comprehensive list of all the support organizations that are also looking for mentorship. So when you're not mentoring at MassChallenge, look at Epicenter, look at Smarter in the City, look at WinLab, so that we're building more of a pipeline and that we're sharing resources, whether it's mentors, time, etc., with one another. So those are some of the initiatives that we're working on for mentorship, but it very much still is, I think, a challenge, and we're trying to crack the code.
So we also address mentorship, or we look at, the numbers are what they are, right? The numbers of people who have the time to mentor, who have value add to bring, especially in a city like Boston. The number of women restaurateurs. So if you were looking just for a woman restaurateur mentor, it would be difficult, right? After last week, we have 3 African Americans who hold unrestricted liquor license in the city. So if you're looking for an African American restaurateur mentor, good luck. But what we try to do is we try to actually flip that question and say, we don't want to ghettoize our community, right? Our community is going to be building businesses in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. They're going to be building successful businesses, but that doesn't mean that the only people who should be giving us advice and talking to us are people who look like us. And what you end up seeing, two of our biggest, they've been teaching all 5 years, they've been mentors, are Bill Warner and Alex Stern. Both of them mentor at MassChallenge, and as a matter of fact, when Rika got to MassChallenge, it was great that she could get Alec as her mentor, who had been working with her for years, and sort of keep that continuity. So what we hope to do is we hope to take our mentors, many of whom look like the majority statistics we've been seeing, and actually help their hearts expand, right? Help them change a little bit. And see how maybe they could become more approachable and more accessible through their relationship with our businesses. So we've never been one to count, right? And thank goodness we don't have to count diversity, right? We have it. But we really try hard not to ghettoize our community. If Bill Warner wants to teach a class and wants to stand in front of our community, I'm going to let him. And because of it, he's invested in several of our companies, right? So it's not just about like, oh, well, if you're Black, then you should have a Black mentor. It's important to see those things, but it's about getting our entrepreneurs of color the best resources they can to jump over the networking gap, the emotional gap, the race and class and gender gaps. And sometimes your best one is a successful old white man, and we love our old white men. They're great, especially when they come and hang out in Roxbury, or feel comfortable bringing some of our folks to the financial district, right? So we like seeing the stretching happening on both sides.
Thank you, and I think that's hopefully helpful in getting us to think about how do we do it. I saw a question here, so I'm gonna run over to you.
Sally, Jesse, wrap it up.
Okay, this question is addressed to Mrs. Miller. I also want to congratulate you again because I find that WeBoss is definitely a week that I really enjoyed and I learned a lot from it. Talking about diversity, I realized that coming back to Boston after having lived in Haiti for 6 years, that many of the organizations have a lot of like people of color, like diversity is everywhere here in Boston. However, I find that there is not really enough inclusivity. You know, like you can go into an organization and you find a variety of people. However, when I start joining these organizations, I realize that it's still kind of like taboo. So I want to know if perhaps in the long run, WeBoss can talk about a place or maybe an event where us women, any women as a matter of fact, we can come and talk about these things. Like, how do I make sure that I also have a voice in that organization? How do I make sure that I'm just not like one person with a picture to showcase my diversity, but actually in the decision making, you know, my voice also counts? So that's a question.
I'm gonna run it to you, Kara.
I think that actually goes right back to what we discussed earlier with admitting, you know, opening the floor to these types of conversations. And I think when we first had Women on Main and I wanted to move out to WeBoss, people said, you can't bring all kinds of entrepreneurs together. No, you gotta have people that are brick and mortars. And I actually partnered with Babson, who's in the room, and we said, what if we had a women's business accelerator where we posted it under Women on Main, but then we also sent it out to like the Babson. What if we reached out to all of our networks and we had it at District Hall, but we really positioned it as a Women on Main event, so we would get our Women on Main, because women who are cafe owners, let's be honest, are less likely to go hop out of their business and go to District Hall. Yeah. And I think the reason is because they don't feel it's a place for them. We even didn't use the word entrepreneur on the flyer because it's getting more comfortable, but 3 years ago, people would look at me and say, I'm not an entrepreneur. Right, I own a little business. I own a little business. So we gave it a try and we brought it together, and that day was an amazing day. It was a half day at District Hall, and we had an MIT 3 PhD software developer sitting next to a cafe owner, sitting next to a woman who makes jewelry in Jamaica Plain, and they were all like, we couldn't get everyone to stop talking, and that's where like these really meaningful connections are made. So I think it's again about being really strategic, about being inclusive, and acknowledging that everyone does come from different backgrounds, and that, hey, you aren't totally alike, but how do we use those differences to kind of build upon one another? And I think events, you know, if you're in a group and you actually feel that way, I think it's time that we start going up to the organizer and saying, hey, I didn't feel included at this. And I encourage people to do the same with WeBoss when they're new and they say, oh, I'm gonna come to an event, and I go, come introduce yourself and I'll bring you around and make sure you know people. And I think as leaders, which we all are here, we need to make sure that at events, we're not just seeing the people we know and grabbing them, we're grabbing those people that look like they're standing in the corner and making them feel included.
Amen, amen.
Other questions? Georgiana, so thank you.
Hi, I'm going to ask a leading question. For women and minority-owned businesses, is there a tendency for them to hold on to a full-time job while they launch a business? And what impact does that have on their growth and success?
So just a reminder, Georgiana is working with me to interview a lot of minority entrepreneurs in and around Boston, and this comes from your experience also in Commonwealth Compact, and she's the Chief Diversity Officer at UMass Boston as well. So she's got a lot of hats. So I'll open it up to the panel.
So what we find with our businesses, is that yes, I mean, if they don't have the luxury of being able to quit their job and do that, and so we actually celebrate people quitting their jobs in our accelerator. Like someone will come in and be like, that's it, I did it. And we're like, yay, cupcakes, and you know, you're free. And so, you know, that's a huge part of it. But I also want to say that I think, and this is where where I think we play a very complementary role to, you know, a model like MassChallenge or Techstars, which is that we're not necessarily, like I joke around and I say, if MassChallenge is looking for the next Google, we're building the businesses that are gonna make Google want to stay in Boston, right? So we're building the cultural businesses, we're building the things that make Boston cool. And so in that way, the idea of getting VC'd, you know, and quitting your job because you just got $20 million, like, we have a couple of businesses, you know, I mean, G House went to Google Ventures, 19th Amendment, you know, what was funded by Paul English, but, you know, we help, I mean, we have one of our first, Douglas Williams, we have a African-American gentleman opening up a restaurant, you know, in November. And so the types of businesses that they open probably also just tend that you can build that runway, right? Like using your weekly paycheck as part of it. The other thing I will throw out that I think is the teams. It does make it hard to keep a team together because a lot of people do have other jobs, and so we try to look for ways, you know, again, rather than just being like, oh, well, that sucks for you because this is the way the culture is, right? It's like, well, no, like the culture, again, was made for giraffes, and like, guess what, elephants have kids, like, or whatever, right? And so, you know, so we need to do it differently. And, you know, but I do think that, you know, we're in a different position than a MassChallenge, which is really looking for these 20x, next Google. You know, we're really looking at building an economy here in Boston. So it might tend, you know, we might tend to get people who work more. I don't know if you want to take that on.
You know, I think it piggybacks the idea of mentorship and, you know, what you're asking about being broke, essentially, because you see it on, you know, women's credit cards, tends, you know, higher credit limit. And nothing about opening a business that you're passionate about or show enthusiasm is easy, you know, and I think it makes it life success better later on. You know, you feel accomplished and committed to what you're doing. You know, it's your dollar, it's your sweat, it's your equity, like you did this. And becoming an entrepreneur, you know, there's always conversation about in millennials, you know, and life's experiences when they, you know, they want to get out of college and they want to have, you know, a 6-figure job. But there's steps, there's notches on a belt that get you to that place of understanding why this went wrong and failing, and then, as I always say, fail fast, move on. Because, you know, to be a mentor, you know, it's challenging because I'm not a mother. I make that decision because I'm very career driven, and I know it would be really challenging and selfish of me. At the same time, you always face whether or not that would be a regret of yours to not have a child. But that's not what we're here for today, necessarily. But, you know, at the same time, but at the same time, you know, you're thinking about, you know, I'm trying to be an entrepreneur, I'm trying to manage, you know, 60 individuals who work for me who may also have a family, and I want to make sure there's butts and seats and they're making money and they're walking away with enough money to pay their rent and to, you know, put food on the table. And, you know, to think about, okay, how can I mentor, you know, and as I've interviewed just in the last couple of weeks, 60 some odd people for our restaurants, you know, they come to the table with those questions that sometimes I feel organically are going to happen. You know, don't search for it because you're going to miss it. Take in every experience and show up 100%, and you're going to realize you might have learned that already, and when you reflect on your day, you might find that you got the answers that you needed without necessarily looking for that one-on-one from your mentor, which I think can be important. But, you know, as far as, you know, becoming an entrepreneur, I work 100 hours a week. So, you know, I think, and not always are they financially successful, amazing, you know, weeks. You know, you have a really bad winter like we had a couple years ago, right? And restaurants were closing and the tea was down and there was nobody out. So you have to account for times like that. So it might be when you're kicking off your business and you're trying to support it with a 40-hour paycheck and trying to do things on your own with another 40 hours that might not be paid. Or maybe 2 years later when you're experiencing an economic crash or a really bad winter storm that are going to affect you again. So that experience of what you went through in the beginning may always present itself later down the road for you in your business, and it's about reflecting on that time and what we were able to do. And I think as a woman, again, getting back to the emotional side of it, we're able to do a lot more than we think we can. And we can get through those challenges. And and the comment that was made earlier about child, babysitting and being able, like, how can a woman work, put dinner on her, the table for her husband who's also been at work, pick up her kids for school, and then attend a discussion panel and maybe get on Slack off to discuss what her work day was like, might be too challenging. So take in life's experiences and I think approach it like I can handle it and I can do this, or reflect on it later and find a way to apply it in days or weeks or years to come.
I just broaden that question a little bit, just for kind of the sake of the conversation. If you want to be humbled, at least in my opinion, like, ask the startups at MassChallenge their story and like what they sacrifice. People, left their spouse, their children for 4 months. So it's just really interesting and inspiring and moving to hear people's stories of whether they had to quit their job full time or whatever their story is. Just yesterday, I hadn't seen one of our startups. She didn't make it to the top 26, and I said, "Where have you been?" I thought you kind of bailed on the program because you were in the top 26, and she said, "No, I actually took a full-time job at MIT because I'm not sure of the future of my startup." And so she kind of had to go back, but yet she's like, "But I met with Emerson last night, and I'm gonna like try." So she's doing both. People are making it work. And so I think that's really interesting to just hear people's stories of what they are sacrificing, financially, family-wise, geography, etc. I think the second thing I'll say really briefly is one of the ways that MassChallenge, I want to get the analogy right, is building the house for the elephant, is that we've started a scholarship program at MassChallenge. This was our second year, where we ask our corporate partners if they would be willing to help cover living wages during MassChallenge. And so I think, so last year I think we had 25, this year we had 40, and the goal is that every startup that comes to MassChallenge will have their living wage covered. And we're also trying to partner potentially with the city of Boston to do something around housing. So trying to think about more creatively, how can we ensure that there's never a reason to say, no, I can't do it. That there's always, maybe that's an obstacle, here's how we can help you overcome that. Or here's another way that we can help you overcome that. Building communities, money, housing, all the, like Maslow's, kind of hierarchy of needs. And so I just kind of want to share that as well.
Thank you. So I think we have one more question back there, and then we'll wrap it up because I know we have an interview for Kara coming up. So.
Thank you for having us here. My name is Maureen, and I'm a co-founder of a failed startup. We bootstrapped for 3 years, signed a term sheet for $10 million, and it was the co-founders were boys against girls. And the investors actually identified the 2 males they kicked off the team, identified us, so if they sued us, they would cover all the legal fees. But also I lived in San Francisco, and Hayward, steps away from Oakland, so Oakland rocks. I'd like to find out more about that bond. But right now I'm at a boutique, a small law firm, and 50% of our clients are women and 50% are minorities. And I'm a bit late today. I ran into one of our mentees at the coffee shop, and I met his family. He's one of 4. They were all orphans in Haiti. They are having degrees, entrepreneurs are pursuing degrees, and it broke my heart, but I wanted to talk to him. But I think mentoring is a great way to get connected and to find people and help people. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. I'm now on the board and the executive committee of the IEEE Boston Entrepreneurs Network. When I first started, I was a panelist. We had just signed a term sheet for $10 million. And I was asked by the men, all white men, to help out on the board. And there was one other female, and then I was on the board, executive committee. Then for a while, I was the only female. And now we have 3 other females on the board. 2 are doctors, another one does executive placement. So I think that there's a lot of entrepreneurship groups out here when MassChallenge, and just find a way to mentor colleges and also serve on the board. It can be difficult at times, but you can do it.
Thank you. So I wanted to actually wrap up. I know you might have a lot more questions, but this is the start of a conversation in my view, rather than the end. And we brought together people today that hopefully will continue their collaborations and work. We have so many different people today that I hope have made meaningful connections, have gotten some smart ideas about how to move forward in their diversity. plans and efforts. I wanted to thank the panel again, Nancy, Kara, Malia, and Rachel. I also want to thank everyone who came today because it signals that you want to see Boston do really well for not just women, but all entrepreneurs of different gender, race, and immigrant status. You know, I think that's a really big conversation that we're also interested in. And you know, for me, I'm continuing the research with Georgiana, focusing minority as well as immigrant entrepreneurs. And I know I'll be working with Kara further just to sort of continue making sure that we are doing the best that we can in Boston. And I hope everyone has an opportunity to network, learn from each other, and make new connections because we have a lot of great people in the room. And I want to again thank everyone for coming, sharing in this experience, and hopefully, you know, we will have more events that are geared towards this kind of difficult conversations at times. So thank you again.